The smell of cheap diner grease was permanently etched into Cole's skin, a stubborn reminder of the 14-hour shifts at the Sunrise Cafe. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the apartment was dead silent, and all he wanted was to find the missing electricity bill in Dakota's desk drawer before the power company cut them off. Instead, beneath a stack of unpaid invoices and faded takeout menus, his calloused fingers brushed against a worn, faux leather notebook. He didn't mean to read it. He thought it was a ledger. But the first line, written in his wife's familiar, hurried script, froze the blood in his veins. His hands don't smell like onions and exhaustion. When Brock touches me, I forget that we are poor. In that single, agonizing heartbeat, 7 years of marriage crumbled into dust. If stories of raw, unfiltered heartbreak, hidden truths, and the heavy price of betrayal speak to you, dim the lights, settle in, and stay with me. The neon sign of the Sunrise Cafe buzzed with a rhythmic, dying hum. The N had flickered out 3 months ago, but Cole Williams didn't have the extra $40 to fix it. $40 was 2 days' worth of commercial cooking oil. It was a water bill. It was survival. Cole unlocked the door to their cramped unit at the Riverside Apartments, moving with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man whose bones ached from the inside out. He had spent the last 14 hours standing over a flat-top grill, flipping burgers, scraping off charred grease, and silently praying the ancient walk-in freezer wouldn't break down again. His uniform, a faded white apron over a gray t-shirt, smelled sharply of stale coffee and fried onions. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:14 a.m. He slipped off his grease-stained boots by the door, careful not to let them thud against the cheap linoleum. In the bedroom, Dakota was a soft mound beneath the thin quilt. Her breathing was deep and even. Even in the dim light filtering through the cheap plastic blinds, she looked beautiful, though the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed the toll of managing the diner's front counter, dealing with the impatient truckers and the penny-pinching regulars. They were both drowning in this life, paddling furiously just to keep their heads above water. Cole rubbed his temples. He needed a shower, but more pressingly, he needed the second notice electricity bill. He had promised to pay it before his shift tomorrow, or they'd be coming home to the dark. He padded quietly into the small alcove they called an office, a cramped corner holding a hand-me-down desk buried under a mountain of paperwork. Cole switched on the small desk lamp, keeping the beam angled down. He sifted through the piles. Unpaid vendor invoices, threatening letters from the bank, a stack of sticky diner receipts. His rough, burn-scarred fingers reached for the back of the bottom drawer, feeling for the familiar stiff envelope of the utility company. Instead, his hand brushed against something soft. Leather. Frowning, Cole pulled it out. It was a small, black notebook with a worn faux leather cover. It looked like the kind of ledger Dakota used to track the waitress tips or vendor shortages. He flipped it open to check if she had slipped the bill inside the pages. The handwriting was undeniably hers, the sharp T's and looping Y's he had seen on 1,000 order slips. But the ink wasn't calculating costs or tracking inventory. Cole's tired eyes scanned the top of the page. October 14th. I'm so tired of smelling like French fries. I'm so tired of looking at my bank account and wanting to cry. Cole works so hard. I know he does. But his hands are always covered in flour and burns. He touches me like he's trying not to break me, but he's so far away. He's married to the grill. He's married to the debt. Cole's breath hitched. A heavy knot formed in his throat. It was a diary. He felt a sudden pang of intrusion, a flush of guilt for invading her private sanctuary of stress. He moved to close the book, ready to put it back in the dark where it belonged. He was a good husband. He respected her. But his eyes betrayed him, catching the next paragraph before the cover could snap shut. Today, Brock came in again. He sat at booth 3. He didn't order the special. He just ordered black coffee and watched me. When I went to clear his mug, his fingers brushed my wrist. His hands don't smell like onions and exhaustion. They smell like cedar and clean soap. When Brock touches me, I forget that we are poor. I forget that I am trapped in this town. The small desk lamp seemed to flare, burning into Cole's retinas. The air in the tiny apartment suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Brock Steele, the foreman from the machine shop down the road. The guy who always left a $10 tip for a $2 coffee. The guy Cole had cooked 3 egg omelets for just yesterday, nodding politely at him through the pass-through window. Cole's hands began to tremble. A drop of sweat, cold and sharp, rolled down his spine. He couldn't stop reading, his eyes dragging themselves across the ink like a man walking toward an execution. I told Cole I was staying late to do inventory. Elite. Brock had a room at the Oakwood Motel. When I walked in, he had bought me a red silk scarf. He said a woman like me shouldn't have to wear cheap polyester. For 3 hours, I wasn't a waitress. I wasn't a failure. I was just a woman. The notebook slipped from Cole's grasp, hitting the desk with a soft, muted thud that sounded like a gunshot in his head. In the next room, Dakota shifted in her sleep, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The woman he loved. The woman he had burned his hands for. The woman who was wearing a red silk scarf she claimed she had found at a thrift store. Cole stared at the wall, the smell of diner grease suddenly making him want to vomit. The world had just ended, and the only sound was the hum of a dying refrigerator. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with the harsh fluorescent glare of the Sunrise Cafe kitchen. It was 6 a.m. The flat-top grill hissed, a vast slab of iron demanding to be fed. Cole stood before it, cracking eggs with a rhythmic, mechanical precision that belied the earthquake inside his chest. He had not slept. He had spent the remaining hours of the night staring at the water-stained ceiling of their apartment, the faux-leather diary burning a hole in the desk drawer down the hall. Through the rectangular pass-through window that separated the cramped kitchen from the dining area, Cole had a perfect, framed view of his wife. Dakota was weaving between the red vinyl booths, balancing 3 plates of hash browns and over-easy eggs on her left arm. She wore her hair pulled back in a messy bun, escaping strands framing her tired face. She offered an automatic smile to an elderly regular in booth 2, pouring him a refill from a glass carafe. Normally, this sight filled Cole with a quiet, solid pride. They were a team. They were surviving the rust and the ruin of the town together. But today the lens was cracked. Every movement she made was filtered through the ink he had read in the dark. "Order up, Cole," Megan Taylor, the morning shift waitress, called out, sliding a green ticket onto the metal rail above the grill. Megan was chewing a piece of peppermint gum, looking halfway to sleep herself as she leaned against the counter. Cole didn't answer. He stared at Dakota as she wiped down a sticky table near the front window. "When Brock touches me, I forget that we are poor." He looked down at his own hands. The knuckles were raw, the skin calloused and perpetually stained with grease and spices. He had burned his right forearm 2 days ago on the fry basket to get her order out faster. Did Brock notice the smell of the diner on her skin? Or did he wash it away in that motel room shower? Dakota approached the pass-through window to grab a side of sourdough toast. She looked at Cole, her brow furrowing slightly beneath the bright lights. "You okay, Cole? You look like you've seen a ghost," she asked, her voice carrying the familiar, raspy edge of too little sleep. It was the voice he had promised to protect. It was the voice that had breathed another man's name in a cheap room while he was scrubbing the industrial grease trap. Cole swallowed the dry tightness in his throat. He picked up the stainless steel spatula, gripping the black plastic handle until his knuckles turned white. "Just tired," he muttered, his voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of an empty steel vat. "Didn't sleep well. The heat." Dakota offered a sympathetic, fleeting smile. "I know, baby. Just get through the lunch rush. I'll make you a strong coffee in a bit." "Baby." The word felt like a physical blow to his ribs. She reached through the window, her fingers briefly brushing his forearm before grabbing the plate of toast. The touch, which usually grounded him in the chaos of the kitchen, now sent a jolt of cold revulsion up his spine. He flinched, a microscopic movement, but enough to pull his arm away from her fingertips. Dakota didn't notice. She was already turning back to the dining floor, her mind on the next table, the next tip, the next escape. Cole watched her walk away, his chest tight with a suffocating pressure. The smell of frying bacon and old coffee, once the comforting aroma of their shared livelihood, now smelled like slow rot. He slammed the spatula down on the sizzling meat, the hot grease splattering his apron and stinging his wrist, but the physical pain was a distant, secondary thing compared to the hollow ache expanding in his chest. By 2:30 in the afternoon, the lunch rush had finally bled out, leaving the Sunrise Cafe smelling of lingering grease and exhausted coffee. The dining room was nearly empty. Cole wiped his hands on a towel that was already stained brown with gravy and pushed through the heavy metal door of the walk-in freezer. He told Megan he needed to check the inventory of frozen fries, but the truth was he just needed to stop breathing the same air as his wife. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in a biting 40-degree isolation. The industrial condenser hummed loudly above, drowning out the faint sounds of the diner. Cole leaned his forehead against a stack of frozen cardboard boxes, the cardboard rough and frosted against his skin. He closed his eyes, but the darkness offered no relief. It only projected the cursive handwriting from the notebook he had devoured in the dead of night. He hadn't stopped at the first page. A sickening compulsion had driven him to flip backward, seeking the genesis of the ruin. He needed to know how a man ordering coffee turned into a motel room key. The diary had laid it out with a brutal, poetic honesty. The betrayal had not started with a touch. It had started with a question. August 12th, the entry had read, "The diner was an oven today. The AC died again." Cole was in the back, screaming at the repair guy on the phone, his face red and dripping with sweat. I was wiping down the counter, feeling like my skin was melting off. Brock walked in. He didn't complain about the heat. He just ordered an iced tea, looked right at me, and asked why a woman with eyes like the ocean was working in a town that didn't have a coast. Cole remembered that day vividly. He remembered the sheer, paralyzing panic of potentially losing $3,000 worth of inventory to the heat. He remembered shouting at Dakota to bring him buckets of ice from the front machine. He hadn't looked at her eyes that day. He had only looked at the melting ice. He had been fighting a war to keep a roof over their heads, oblivious to the fact that his wife was drowning in the trenches right beside him. He shifted his weight in the freezing air, his breath pluming in white clouds. The diary entries were a chronological map of his own absence. September 4th, she had written, "Brock asked me what my favorite movie was today. Took me a minute to remember. It has been 4 years since anyone asked me a question about myself that didn't involve the cafe. Cole only asks if the ketchup bottles are filled or if the till balances. Brock listens. He looked at me like my answer mattered. Cole looks at me like I'm a good employee." The words were a serrated knife twisting in his gut. The affair was an emotional hijacking, and Brock Steele had simply walked through a door that Cole had left wide open. Cole had sacrificed his role as a lover, as a partner, to become a provider and a manager. He had traded his wife's happiness for the survival of a failing business, assuming she understood the arithmetic of their poverty. But a woman could not be warmed by paid electric bills or balanced ledgers. She needed to be seen. Brock had weaponized Cole's exhaustion. He had sat 10 feet away from the kitchen, separated only by a thin wall of drywall and stainless steel, and carefully dismantled Cole's marriage with nothing but attention and sweet tea. Cole punched the frozen box of fries beside him. It was a short, dull strike that accomplished nothing but scraping the skin off his knuckles. He welcomed the sting. It was a sharp, focused pain, vastly preferable to the sprawling, suffocating realization that he had built a prison out of a diner, and he could not even blame his wife for wanting to escape it. Cole pushed open the heavy door of the walk-in freezer, stepping out of the biting cold and back into the stifling, humid air of the kitchen corridor. The sudden temperature shift made his skin prickle, but it did nothing to thaw the ice forming in his veins. He needed a clean mop head from the supply closet at the end of the hall. It was a mundane task, a desperate attempt to anchor his hands to physical labor while his mind unspooled. He walked past the narrow alcove that served as the employee break area. It was nothing more than a battered folding chair and a coat rack mounted unevenly on the peeling drywall. Dakota's worn, gray wool coat was draped over the brass hook. And there, spilling out of the left pocket like a sudden hemorrhage against the drab fabric, was the red silk scarf. Cole stopped dead in his tracks. The air in his lungs turned to ash. He stared at the vibrant slash of crimson. It was an obscenely beautiful thing, completely alien to the grim, grease-stained reality of the Sunrise Cafe. He remembered the exact day it had appeared in their lives. It was a bleak Tuesday in mid-November. Dakota had come in for the evening shift after supposedly spending the afternoon running errands and paying the water bill at the municipal building. Her cheeks had been flushed, her eyes unusually bright, and wrapped elegantly around her neck was that impossible splash of red. "It's beautiful," Cole had told her, wiping his hands on a kitchen rag, pausing for a rare moment just to look at his wife. Dakota had smiled, a small, tight thing, and adjusted the knot. "Thrift store down on 4th Street. $3 in the bargain bin. Can you believe it?" Cole had believed it. He had felt a familiar, crushing weight of inadequacy, the quiet shame of a husband who could only afford to dress his wife in another woman's discarded clothes. But he had also felt a surge of tenderness because the scarf made her look radiant, momentarily lifting the exhaustion from her features. Now, standing in the dim hallway, the diary's words overlaid the memory, turning the sweet recollection into a grotesque mockery. "I told Cole I bought it for $3 at Goodwill," the blue ink had confessed in the silence of the night. "The tag said 85. Brock bought it for me before we even went up to room 12 at the Oakwood. He wrapped it around my neck in the front seat of his truck. He said a woman's throat shouldn't be hidden by cheap wool. I wore it home. I wore it right into the diner." Cole touched it and smiled. "I felt sick to my stomach, but God help me, I also felt a thrill. I was wearing a secret right in front of him." Cole took a slow, agonizing step toward the coat rack. He raised his right hand, the knuckles still white and scraped from his outburst in the freezer. Slowly, tentatively, he brushed his rough fingertips against the fabric. It was genuine silk. It slipped against his calluses with a fluid, liquid grace. It was the texture of money. It was the texture of a man who did not have to worry about the price of cooking oil or a broken neon sign. The sheer audacity of it made Cole's vision blur. She had worn it to work. She had worn the physical proof of her infidelity into the very building they were killing themselves to keep open. She had let him compliment the very noose another man had bought for their marriage. His fingers curled, gripping the delicate fabric. For one blinding, violent second, he wanted to rip it from the pocket, take it to the flat-top grill, and watch the expensive silk melt and burn into black ash among the burger grease. He wanted to destroy Brock Steele's claim on his wife. But he let go. The silk slipped smoothly from his grasp, settling back into the pocket. Burning the scarf would be a scream, and Cole wasn't ready to scream. Not yet. He turned his back on the coat rack and walked toward the mop bucket, carrying the weight of a truth that was far heavier than the silence. The dinner rush hit the Sunrise Cafe at 6 o'clock with the force of a freight train. The bell above the front door chimed relentlessly, signaling the arrival of exhausted mill workers, tired mechanics, and families looking for a cheap, hot meal. Under normal circumstances, Cole operated in the kitchen like a machine. He was the anchor, moving with a blind, rhythmic muscle memory that kept the chaos at bay. Tonight, the anchor was dragging at the bottom of a very dark ocean. The heat of the flat-top grill radiated against his face, a physical manifestation of the anger trapped in his chest. His mind was not on the tickets lining the metal rail above him. It was stuck on a loop of blue ink. "I'm so tired of smelling like French fries. I'm so tired of looking at my bank account." He flipped a row of burgers, the spatula feeling foreign and clumsy in his hand. "Earth to Cole!" A voice barked over the hiss of searing meat. Dan Williams, Cole's older brother who picked up evening shifts at the fry station to help them out, nudged him hard with a shoulder. Dan was a large, pragmatic man, his face permanently ruddy from standing over boiling oil. "You're scorching the patty melts, man," Dan said, pointing a pair of tongs at the grill. "That's the second one you've burned on one side. The waitress is standing right there waiting." Cole blinked, the kitchen coming back into sharp, painful focus. He looked down. The rye bread was black and smoking. He mechanically scraped the ruined sandwiches into the industrial trash bin, the scrape of steel on iron screeching in his ears. "Sorry," Cole muttered, his voice sounding entirely unlike his own. He threw fresh bread and meat onto the flat top. Dan leaned closer, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a tattooed forearm. "You sick or something? You look like ash. Dakota told me you were up pacing the apartment all night." Hearing her name in Dan's mouth made Cole's stomach pitch violently. He wanted to grab his brother by the collar. He wanted to scream the truth over the roar of the exhaust fans. "She's sleeping with the foreman from the machine shop, Dan. She's wearing his silk while we scrape grease for pennies." But the words remained lodged in his throat, a thick, choking knot of humiliation. He could not say it. Saying it out loud would make it real in the daylight. "Just a migraine," Cole lied, keeping his eyes glued to the sizzling beef. He reached for the salt shaker, but his hands were trembling so badly he fumbled the metal cylinder. It clattered against the stainless steel prep table, spilling a white mound of salt into a puddle of raw egg white. Dan stopped what he was doing. He set his tongs down and stepped fully into Cole's space. His dark eyes were sharp, scanning Cole's pale, sweat-drenched face. "Look at me," Dan ordered, his voice dropping an octave, losing the casual kitchen banter. "Something is wrong. You've been staring at the wall for 3 minutes at a time. You poured sweet tea into the mop bucket 20 minutes ago. Do I need to take over the grill? Do you need to go home?" Home. The word was a cruel joke. Home was a dark apartment with a faux-leather notebook hiding in a desk drawer. Home was a bed where his wife dreamt of another man's hands. Cole gripped the edge of the metal counter. His left thumb accidentally pressed against the hot edge of the iron grill. The skin blistered instantly, a sharp, searing burn. Cole didn't pull his hand away. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at his brother, his eyes hollow and utterly dead. Dan saw the burn. He swore under his breath, physically shoving Cole's hand away from the heat. "What the hell is the matter with you, Cole? You didn't even feel that." "Drop another basket of fries, Dan," Cole said quietly, turning his back to the dining room, unable to look through the pass-through window anymore. The pressure in his skull was building. A sealed boiler pushed far beyond its structural limit. The night was not over, and he knew, with a terrifying, cold certainty, that the worst was yet to come. The chime above the front door at 7:15 p.m. sounded exactly like it always did, a cheap brass jingle that usually signaled another $6 for the cash register. But when Cole glanced up from scraping the flat-top grill, the air in his lungs violently seized. Brock Steele had just walked in. He didn't look like the rest of the evening patrons. He wasn't covered in soot or hauling the invisible, crushing weight of past-due bills. He wore a crisp, dark flannel shirt tucked into clean denim, his heavy work boots stepping onto the scuffed linoleum with the easy, entitled confidence of a man who owned his world. Cole froze, the heavy metal grill scraper hovering an inch above the smoking iron. Through the rectangular pass-through window, he watched the scene unfold with the terrifying, paralyzing clarity of a slow-motion car crash. Dakota was at the far end of the counter, refilling a plastic ketchup bottle. When the door chimed, she turned. Cole saw it, the microscopic hitch in her breathing, the sudden, unnatural straightening of her spine, the way her free hand nervously fluttered to her collarbone before she forced it down to her side. It was a reaction he would have entirely missed yesterday. Today, armed with the poison of her diary, it was a glaring, neon confession. Brock took a seat at the counter, right in the center, directly in Cole's line of sight. He smiled at Dakota, a slow, familiar curve of the lips that made Cole's stomach violently pitch. "Evening, Dakota," Brock said. His voice was deep, smooth, carrying effortlessly over the low hum of the diner's exhaust fans. "Hi, Brock," she replied. Her voice was slightly breathless, lacking its usual customer service edge. "The usual? You know it." Dakota scribbled on her green pad, tore the slip, and walked to the pass-through window. She wouldn't meet Cole's eyes. She slapped the ticket onto the metal rail. "1 diner burger, medium rare." No onions. Cole stared at the piece of paper. It was a mundane request, but in that moment, it felt like a mandate of utter humiliation. He was being ordered to physically provide sustenance for the man who was devouring his marriage. He turned to the prep fridge, moving with the stiff, robotic motions of a corpse. He pulled out a fresh patty of ground chuck. As he threw the meat onto the hot grill, the sizzle sounded like hissing laughter. He seasoned it, his scarred hands trembling so violently he dropped the salt shaker. It clattered loudly against the steel counter, but he had to pick it up, dust it off, and continue. Every passing second felt like an hour of physical torture. Through the window, Brock was leaning forward, resting his forearms on the counter. His hands, the hands that didn't smell like grease, the hands that had wrapped a red silk scarf around Dakota's neck in room 12 of the Oakwood Motel, were mere inches from where Dakota was wiping down the laminated surface. Cole grabbed a heavy meat cleaver to slice a tomato. He gripped the textured black handle until his knuckles ached and his joints popped. He looked at the sharp, gleaming edge of the blade, then looked at the back of Brock's thick neck. The primal, violent urge to vault over the counter and bury the steel into the man was so overwhelming it made his vision swim with dark spots. But then his eyes shifted to the rusted cash register. He saw the stack of unpaid invoices tucked beneath the drawer. He saw the flickering, dying neon sign out the front window. He was trapped. If he attacked Brock, he would go to jail, the diner would immediately shut down, and the crushing debt would swallow them whole. He was paralyzed by the very poverty Dakota was trying to escape. Cole slowly set the knife down. He flipped the burger. He built the sandwich with methodical, agonizing precision, placed it on a heavy ceramic plate, and slid it onto the pass-through ledge. "Order up," Cole said, his voice a dead, hollow rasp. Dakota took the plate. She served it to Brock, offering him a soft smile that Cole used to think belonged only to him. Cole turned his back to the dining room, gripping the edge of the stainless steel sink, closing his eyes as a single, humiliating tear of pure, impotent rage slid down his cheek and vanished into the dirty dishwater. The lock on the apartment door clicked shut at 1:30 a.m. Cole didn't bother turning on the overhead lights in the small entryway. He walked straight to the cramped office alcove, the air heavy with the lingering scent of stale coffee and fryer oil clinging to his clothes. He pulled the faux leather notebook from the desk drawer. It felt heavier tonight, saturated with the poison he had already consumed, yet demanding he finish the dose. He sat in the dark, illuminated only by the harsh yellow beam of the small desk lamp. The pages rustled, a dry, damning sound in the silent apartment. He had survived cooking Brock steal a burger, a physical humiliation that had left an ashen taste in his mouth. Now, he sought the psychological autopsy of his failing marriage. He turned to an entry dated mid-December. The handwriting here was erratic, less romanticized than the earlier pages. The ink was pressed so hard into the paper it left an embossed texture on the reverse side. December 18th, it read, "I looked at Cole tonight while he was sleeping. He had a new burn on his forearm, a long, angry red line from the fry basket. I started crying. I felt like a monster. I swore to myself I would never go back to the Oakwood Motel. I told myself I would block Brock's number. I love Cole. I do. He is a good, honest man trying to keep us alive." Cole stopped reading. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cheap wooden chair. A small, pathetic ember of hope flared in his chest. She had felt the guilt. She had recognized the magnitude of her sin. But the ember was quickly suffocated by the cold reality that the affair had continued. He forced his eyes open and kept reading. But then the morning comes. The ink continued, the letters sloping downward as if defeated by gravity. The morning comes, and the hot water heater is broken again. The bank calls about the overdraft. The smell of old grease hits me before I even open my eyes. And suddenly, my chest is so tight I can't pull air into my lungs. The guilt is heavy, but the poverty is heavier. Cole traced the words with a calloused finger. This wasn't a confession of falling out of love. It was a confession of drowning. When Brock texts me, he doesn't ask about the electric bill. He asks what color dress I want to wear. When I am in that motel room, I am not a waitress drowning in debt. I am a woman who is desired, a woman who is taken care of. It's a drug. It is a terrible, selfish drug, and I am addicted to the hour of amnesia it gives me. I tell myself I am a better wife when I come home because I am not so angry at the world. I lie to Cole, but I am lying to myself too. I am selling my soul for a clean hotel room and a man who buys me things I don't need. The revelation was colder than the restaurant's walk-in freezer. Cole realized, with a devastating, absolute clarity, that he was not fighting another man for his wife's heart. He was fighting the crushing gravity of their socio-economic reality. Brock Steele was not a great love. He was a symptom. He was an anesthetic to the pain of being poor. And that was the tragedy that broke Cole completely. He could throw a punch. He could fight another man in the parking lot. But he could not fight the systemic exhaustion of their lives. He could not cook enough burgers to buy her the amnesia she craved. The diary laid bare a fundamental, irreparable truth. Dakota's betrayal was born not just from lust, but from a desperate, quiet despair that Cole's calloused hands could never fix. Cole sat frozen in the cramped, airless office. The cheap desk lamp cast long, distorted shadows against the peeling wallpaper. He had reached a terrifying plateau of understanding regarding Brock Steele. He had swallowed the bitter pill that his wife was using another man as an anesthetic against their shared poverty. He thought he had reached the bottom of the abyss. He was wrong. The faux-leather notebook was thick, but the entries about Brock only occupied the last quarter of the pages. In the middle was a thick section of blank, lined paper. It looked like the beginning of the book was unused. But a cold, creeping intuition, born from a lifetime of checking the bottom of crates for rotten produce, urged his thumb to flip to the very first pages. The paper here was stiffer, slightly yellowed at the edges. The ink was a faded blue ballpoint, not the crisp black gel pen she used now. Cole's eyes focused on the date at the top of the first inscribed page. March 3rd. The year written beside it was 3 years ago. It was the winter the main plumbing line had burst beneath the Sunrise Cafe. They had been closed for 2 weeks, hemorrhaging money they didn't have, standing on the absolute precipice of bankruptcy. Cole remembered the bone-deep terror of those weeks, the way he had begged contractors for extensions, the way he had held Dakota in the dark, promising her he would fix it. He looked down at her faded blue handwriting. We are going to lose the cafe. Cole hasn't slept in 3 days, and he looks like a ghost. I can't breathe in this apartment anymore. I went to the Blue Moon bar tonight just to stop shaking. A man bought me a drink, a liquor supply rep from out of state. He had kind eyes and a warm car. I went back to his room at the Interstate Motel. For 2 hours, I wasn't drowning in debt. I wasn't cold. It meant absolutely nothing. I just needed to feel alive for a minute while everything else is dying. The silence in the apartment became absolute. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock seemed to stop. The tragic, poetic empathy Cole had felt just moments ago evaporated into a sterile, terrifying void. Brock Steele was not an isolated mistake born of recent exhaustion. Brock was merely the newest version of a coping mechanism Dakota had developed years ago. Whenever the water got too high, whenever the reality of their working-class life became too suffocating, she found an emergency exit in the bed of a stranger. Cole's hands stopped trembling. A profound, unnatural calm washed over him. It was the calm of a man who realizes he has been desperately performing CPR on a body that has been dead for years. The last 3 years of his life. The burns, the 14-hour shifts, the skipped meals so she could eat, the relentless, grinding sacrifice, had all been a monument built on a rotting foundation. She had already abandoned him in the trenches when the war first got hard. He slowly closed the notebook, tracing the worn faux leather cover one last time. He looked past the desk, out the open doorway toward the dark hallway closet where they kept their luggage. An image materialized in his mind with crystalline clarity. Pulling his canvas duffel bag from the top shelf, packing his few grease-stained shirts, and stepping out into the cold morning air to hail a cab away from this town. He stared into the shadows, his voice a dry, hollow whisper that carried no anger, only the heavy ashes of absolute defeat. You finally told me the truth, Dakota. He rehearsed to the empty room, knowing the confrontation was now only a formality. But the truth I needed was written 3 years ago. Wednesday morning brought a relentless, driving rain that lashed against the grease-stained front windows of the Sunrise Cafe. It also brought Thomas Higgins, the county health inspector, a stern man whose metal clipboard held the absolute power to padlock their doors forever. Normally, an unannounced inspection would induce a frantic, sweating panic in Cole. He would be barking rapid-fire orders, scrubbing the flat-top grill until his shoulders screamed, terrified of a single-point deduction that could lead to a fine they could not afford to pay. Today, Cole did not sweat. He did not bark orders. He moved through the narrow kitchen with the terrifying, mechanical precision of a machine operating on a dying battery. He had crossed a final, desolate threshold in the dark hours of the morning, leaving behind the desperate husband who fought for their shared survival. What remained was merely a shell, executing tasks. Dakota stood near the waitress station, her hands trembling slightly as she polished the same thick ceramic coffee mug for the 4th time. She watched her husband interact with Higgins through the pass-through window. Cole's voice was a flat, monotone drone as he read off the internal temperatures of the walk-in freezer. There was no tremor in his scarred hands when he handed over the thick stack of vendor invoices. His eyes, usually fierce with the chronic stress of their poverty, were entirely hollow. It was this profound emptiness that terrified her more than any screaming match ever could. She knew something was fundamentally broken. For the past 2 days, she had felt his withdrawal, a slow, agonizing recession of his spirit. But today, it was absolute. When she had walked past him in the cramped hallway near the stockroom earlier, her shoulder accidentally brushing his, he hadn't flinched, tensed, or pulled away. He had simply yielded the physical space, reacting to her touch as if she were nothing more than a draft of cold air. The guilt sitting heavy in her chest, the secret of Brock's steel and the afternoons at the Oakwood Motel, began to rot under the crushing weight of Cole's silence. She had justified the affair to herself as a necessary escape, a temporary anesthetic to survive the suffocating pressure of their failing business. But looking at Cole now, methodically sanitizing the prep station while Higgins scribbled on his clipboard, Dakota realized she hadn't just escaped the pressure. She had abandoned him inside it to drown alone. Higgins finally clicked his pen shut, the sound sharp over the hiss of the rain. You're cleared, Cole. Barely passed on the grease trap maintenance, but I'll let it slide this quarter. Keep it clean. Thank you, sir, Cole replied. His tone was completely devoid of the massive, shuddering relief that should have accompanied those words. He didn't look at Dakota to share a triumphant glance. He just turned his back to the dining room and faced the industrial sink. The brass bell above the door chimed as the inspector walked out into the storm. The diner fell suffocatingly quiet. Dakota set the polished mug down. Her chest heaved. The adrenaline of the inspection rapidly drained away, leaving only the sickening reality of her own sins. She walked slowly toward the pass-through window. Cole was scrubbing a heavy steel pan, staring blankly at the gray, soapy water. Cole, she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. He didn't stop scrubbing. Yeah. We passed. We're okay for another 3 months. Yeah. She gripped the edge of the metal counter, her knuckles turning white against the stainless steel. The silence between them was a physical weight, pressing down on her lungs until she could barely draw breath. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't wear the mask of the loyal, struggling wife while carrying the heavy, dirty truth of another man's hands. She desperately believed his detachment was the result of the diner finally breaking his spirit, completely unaware that it was actually her own hidden ink that had delivered the fatal blow. We need to talk, Dakota said, a single tear finally breaking free and tracking through the dusting of cheap-face powder on her cheek. Tonight, after closing, I can't keep doing this, Cole. There's something I need to tell you. Cole finally stopped scrubbing. He didn't look up to meet her tear-filled eyes. He simply set the wet sponge down on the metal ledge, his movements slow and agonizingly deliberate. I know, Cole said quietly to the dirty dishwater. We'll talk tonight. At 11:30 p.m. The heavy deadbolt of the Sunrise Cafe slid into place with a hollow, metallic clank. The closed sign was flipped outward to the rain-slicked street. The dining room was dark, illuminated only by the amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the greasy front window. The air smelled sharply of industrial bleach, damp mop strings, and the exhaustion of a 14-hour day. Cole sat in booth 3, the exact booth where Brock Steele always sat. He rested his forearms on the cold, laminated table, his burned, calloused hands perfectly still. He felt entirely detached from his own body, a ghost haunting his own life. Dakota emerged from the back kitchen. She had taken off her stained apron, her shoulders slumped beneath her faded gray sweater. Her eyes were already red-rimmed, her breathing shallow and erratic. She slid into the vinyl booth opposite him, refusing to meet his deadened gaze. She stared down at her own trembling hands, twisting a damp paper napkin until it began to tear. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy, broken only by the hum of the ancient beverage cooler in the corner. "I'm sorry," Dakota whispered to the table. The words fractured as they left her throat. A single tear dropped onto the ripped napkin. "Cole, I am so sorry." Cole did not move. He did not reach across the table to comfort her. He simply watched her break. "For what, Dakota?" She squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her lashes. She took a shuddering breath, bracing herself for an explosion that was never going to come. "It was Brock," she sobbed, the name finally tearing out of her chest. "Brock Steele. I made a mistake, Cole. Terrible, stupid mistake." Cole stared at her. "A mistake?" "Yes," she pleaded, finally looking up at him, her face a mask of desperation and carefully managed guilt. It was recent. A few weeks ago when the bank sent that final notice about the loan. I was so terrified we were going to lose the cafe. I was suffocating Cole. He came in and he was nice to me. He listened. I had a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. I swear to God, it meant absolutely nothing. It was just a stupid escape from the stress. She reached across the table, her trembling fingers wrapping around his rigid wrist. "Please, Cole. It was only a couple of times. I ended it. Couldn't look at you anymore. I love you. We built this life together. Please don't let my stupidity destroy it. Scream at me, throw plates, hate me. But please, tell me we can fix this." Cole looked down at her hand grasping his wrist. He felt the phantom brush of silk against his knuckles. He saw the faded blue ink from 3 years ago, the Interstate Motel, the liquor supply rep. She was crying, genuinely weeping, but she was still managing the ledger. She was trying to pay off a massive moral debt with pennies. She framed it as a recent slip, a byproduct of their immediate crisis, completely omitting the months of calculated lies, the Oakwood Motel, the red scarf, and the fact that she had done this exact same thing 3 years prior. She was trying to survive the confession the same way she survived the poverty, by cutting corners and hiding the real cost. The profound tragedy was that she truly believed this diluted version of the truth was enough to break his heart but save his pride. She had no idea she was speaking to a man who had already attended the funeral of their marriage. Cole slowly, deliberately pulled his arm back, sliding his wrist out of her desperate grasp. The movement was entirely devoid of anger. It was just an absolute, chilling withdrawal. "A few weeks ago," Cole repeated, his voice a flat, deadened whisper in the dark diner. "Just a moment of weakness over the bank loan." "Yes?" she sobbed, nodding frantically, clinging to the lie that she thought would save them. "Just a mistake." Cole looked at the woman he had burned his hands for, the woman he had starved for, and realized he didn't know her at all. The amber light from the street lamp caught the silver tracks of tears on Dakota's cheeks. She sat in the vinyl booth, her chest heaving with the exertion of her partial confession, waiting for the storm. She waited for Cole to slam his fist onto the laminated table, to curse Brock Steele's name, to demand the grueling, painful work of marital reconciliation. She was ready to endure his rage because rage meant he still cared enough to fight. Instead, Cole reached into the deep pocket of his faded canvas jacket. He did not break eye contact with her as he withdrew a small, black object. He set it down on the table between them. It landed with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the closed diner. Dakota's breath hitched in her throat. The tears instantly stopped flowing. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of dirty snow. She stared at the worn, faux-leather cover of her hidden notebook, her mind struggling to process the absolute catastrophe wresting inches from her hands. "A few weeks ago," Cole repeated, his voice still that flat, terrifying whisper. He reached out and flipped the cover open. The spine cracked softly. He bypassed the recent pages, turning smoothly to the middle of the book. "A moment of weakness over a bank loan," Cole continued, tracing the blue ink with his scarred index finger. He began to read aloud, not with anger, but with the hollow cadence of a priest delivering last rites. "I told Cole I bought it for $3 at Goodwill. The tag said 85. Brock bought it for me before we even went up to room 12 at the Oakwood." Dakota squeezed her eyes shut, a pathetic, animal-like whimper escaping her lips. She covered her mouth with both hands, shaking violently. Cole didn't stop. "You wore it into this kitchen, Dakota. You stood right over there by the prep station, smelling like his hotel room, and you let me touch that red silk. You let me smile and tell you it was beautiful because I was too poor to buy you anything better, and I was just happy you had something nice." "Cole, please," she choked out, the words muffled behind her hands. "Please stop. I'm so sorry." "I thought I could survive that," Cole said softly, finally looking up from the page. "I spent the whole day yesterday thinking about how I failed you, how I let this place turn me into a machine, and how I left you so lonely that you had to sell yourself to a foreman just to feel human." Dakota lowered her hands, a desperate, microscopic flicker of hope igniting in her tear-drowned eyes. He understood. He saw the pain that drove her to it. But Cole reached for the notebook again. He pinched a thick section of pages and flipped backward, all the way to the stiff, yellowed paper at the very beginning. The flicker of hope in Dakota's eyes died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, absolute dread. She had forgotten. God, she had forgotten what she had written back then. Cole looked at the date. March 3rd. 3 years ago. "I was willing to take the blame for Brock," Cole whispered, the ghost in his eyes solidifying into cold, impenetrable stone. "But you didn't just start drowning this year, did you? The water got high 3 years ago when the plumbing burst. I didn't sleep for 3 days trying to save this place for us." He looked down and read her oldest sin into the quiet room. "I went to the Blue Moon bar tonight just to stop shaking. A man bought me a drink. A liquor supply rep from out of state. I went back to his room. I just needed to feel alive for a minute while everything else is dying." Dakota slumped forward against the table, burying her face in her arms, weeping with the primal, ugly sound of a soul being entirely unmasked. There was no defense left. There were no partial truths to hide behind. Cole slowly closed the diary. He slid it across the laminated table until it rested against her arm. "Everything else died that night, Dakota," Cole said, his voice finally carrying the heavy, exhausting weight of a finished morning. "I just spent the last 3 years working in a graveyard." Dakota's sobs echoed in the empty Sunrise Cafe, a mournful soundtrack to the death of their shared existence. Cole did not reach out across the table to comfort her. The phantom weight of the past 3 years, the burns, the panic attacks over unpaid bills, the bone-deep exhaustion, sloughed off his shoulders, leaving him terrifyingly light. He stood up from the vinyl booth. Reaching into the front pocket of his canvas jacket, he pulled out the heavy brass key to the diner's front door. He placed it gently on the laminated table, right on top of the faux-leather diary. The metal clinked against the cover with absolute finality. "The grill is clean," Cole said quietly, his voice completely devoid of malice. "Higgins cleared the grease trap. The breakfast prep is done in the walk-in. It's yours now, Dakota. You and the foreman can figure out the bank loan." Dakota's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a terror that eclipsed her previous guilt. "Cole, no. No, you can't leave. This is your place. You built this. No, Cole corrected her, his tone perfectly even. I built a prison, and you've been breaking out of it for years. He turned his back on booth 3. He didn't look at the rusted cash register or the dying neon sign in the window. He simply pushed open the heavy glass door, the cheap brass bell chiming his exit into the driving rain. The walk to the Riverside apartments was a cold, numbing blur. By the time Cole unlocked the door to their cramped unit, his jacket was soaked through, but for the first time in nearly a decade, he didn't smell like fried onions and stale coffee. He smelled the rain. He walked straight to the hallway closet and pulled down his old canvas duffel bag. He didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. He moved through the shadows of the bedroom by memory, folding his few worn flannel shirts and jeans. He left the white aprons hanging in the closet. He left the ledger on the desk. He packed only what belonged to Cole Williams the man, not Cole the cook. The apartment door burst open. Dakota stood in the threshold, drenched and shivering, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. She had run the whole way. Please, she sobbed, leaning heavily against the doorframe, her wet hair plastered to her cheeks. I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll work double shifts. I'll never speak to him again. Just, please don't leave me in this town alone. Cole zipped the canvas bag shut. The harsh rasp of the metal zipper severed the last invisible thread between them. He hoisted the heavy strap over his shoulder and walked toward the entryway. Dakota saw the absolute, terrifying peace in his eyes, and she finally understood. There was no anger left to bargain with. There was only a profound, insurmountable emptiness. Defeated, she slowly stepped aside. Cole opened the front door. Down in the asphalt parking lot, the headlights of a waiting taxi cut through the heavy downpour, the wipers beating a steady rhythm against the windshield. He stepped out onto the concrete walkway. The cold wind bit at his face, but he didn't flinch. He turned back to look at the woman he had loved, the woman who had traded their vows for a temporary escape from the dark. You finally told me the truth, Dakota, Cole said, the rain washing away the last traces of his exhaustion. But the truth I needed was written 3 years ago. He turned around, walked down the metal stairs, and stepped into the idling car. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, merging into the dark, wet streets, Cole didn't look back at the apartment window. He just looked straight ahead, into the quiet, unbroken night.